Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there was a beautiful princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as black as ebony. Her stepmother, the queen, was very jealous of her beauty. The queen had a magic mirror, and every day she would ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." As Snow White grew older, her beauty became greater. One day, the mirror gave a different answer. "Snow White is the fairest of them all," it said. The queen was furious. She couldn't stand the thought of someone being more beautiful than her. In her jealousy, the queen decided to get rid of Snow White. She called a huntsman and ordered him to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. The huntsman was shocked but had to obey. The huntsman took Snow White deep into the forest. When they were far away from the castle, he pulled out his knife. But when he looked into Snow White's innocent eyes, he couldn't bring himself to harm her. "Run away, Snow White," he said. "The queen wants you dead, but I cannot do it." Snow White, frightened and confused, ran as fast as she could into the dark forest, not knowing where to go. Snow White ran through the forest, scared and alone. Finally, she saw a small cottage hidden among the trees. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. Tired and hungry, she decided to go inside. The cottage was small but cozy, and everything was tiny. There were 7 little chairs, 7 little beds, and 7 little plates. Snow White was so tired that she lay down on one of the beds and fell fast asleep. That evening, the 7 dwarfs who lived in the cottage returned home from their work in the mines. They were surprised to find someone in their house. "Who is sleeping in my bed?" asked one of the dwarfs. Snow White woke up and was frightened when she saw the dwarfs. But the dwarfs were kind and asked her who she was. Snow White told them her story, and the dwarfs felt sorry for her. They offered her a place to stay. Snow White was grateful for the dwarfs' kindness and agreed to stay with them. In return, she helped them with the housework, cooking, and cleaning. The dwarfs warned her to be careful and never let anyone into the house, especially the queen. They knew the queen was dangerous and would stop at nothing to get rid of Snow White. Snow White promised to listen to their advice and lived happily with the dwarfs for a while. Back at the castle, the queen asked her magic mirror once again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs, is the fairest of them all." The queen was furious. She realized that the huntsman had not killed Snow White as she had ordered. Determined to take matters into her own hands, the queen came up with a wicked plan. The queen disguised herself as an old woman and went to the dwarf's cottage with a poisoned apple. When Snow White opened the door, the old woman offered her the apple, saying it was a magic apple that would make her wishes come true. Snow White, not knowing the danger, took a bite of the apple. As soon as she did, she fell to the ground, unconscious. The queen smiled, thinking her plan had worked, and left the forest. When the dwarfs came home that evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground, not moving. They tried to wake her, but it was no use. They were heartbroken and thought she was dead. The dwarfs couldn't bear to bury her, so they placed her in a glass coffin and kept it in the forest, surrounded by flowers. Every day, they visited her, hoping that one day she might wake up. Time passed, and one day, a prince was riding through the forest. He saw Snow White in the glass coffin and was struck by her beauty. The dwarfs told him the story of what had happened. The prince, moved by their tale, asked if he could take Snow White back to his castle. As the prince's servants carried the coffin, they stumbled, and the piece of poisoned apple fell out of Snow White's mouth. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. Snow White was alive. The dwarfs and the prince were overjoyed. Snow White explained that she felt like she had been in a deep sleep for a long time. The prince, who had fallen in love with Snow White at first sight, asked her to come with him to his castle. Snow White, grateful to the prince and the dwarfs for saving her, agreed. She said goodbye to the dwarfs, thanking them for their kindness and promising to visit them often. Snow White and the prince returned to the castle, where they prepared for their wedding. The entire kingdom celebrated the return of their princess and the joy of her marriage to the prince. Meanwhile, back at the evil queen's castle, the queen once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "Snow White, who lives with the prince, is the fairest of them all." The queen was furious. She couldn't believe that Snow White was still alive. In her anger, she smashed the mirror and vowed to take revenge. However, before she could carry out her plan, the queen was caught in a terrible storm that destroyed her castle. Snow White and the prince, hearing the news, were relieved to know that the evil queen could no longer harm anyone. They continued to live peacefully, enjoying their life together. After their wedding, Snow White and the prince invited the dwarfs to live with them in the castle. The dwarfs, happy to be reunited with Snow White, accepted the invitation. They all lived together in harmony, with the dwarfs helping out in the palace and enjoying their new home. Snow White never forgot the kindness of the dwarfs and always made sure they were treated with love and respect. Snow White and the prince ruled the kingdom with kindness and fairness. They made sure everyone in their kingdom was happy and well cared for. Snow White often visited the forest where she had once lived with the dwarfs. She planted flowers and took care of the animals, remembering the days when she had lived in the little cottage. The people of the kingdom loved Snow White for her gentle heart and wisdom. Years went by, and Snow White and the prince had children of their own. They taught their children the importance of kindness, bravery, and honesty. The children loved hearing the story of how their mother had once lived with the 7 dwarfs and how love had saved her from the queen's wicked plans. The story of Snow White became a legend that was passed down through generations. The 7 dwarfs became beloved figures in the kingdom as well. They were known for their hard work, their kindness, and their loyalty to Snow White. People would come from all over the kingdom to meet the dwarfs and hear their stories. The dwarfs enjoyed their new lives in the castle but always remembered their little cottage in the forest. Sometimes, they would visit it and laugh about the old days. Snow White never forgot the lessons she had learned during her time in the forest. She knew that true beauty came from within and that kindness was the greatest strength a person could have. She and the prince made sure that their kingdom was a place where everyone was treated with kindness and respect. Their kingdom became known as a land of peace and happiness, where no one was ever judged by their appearance. The story of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs teaches us that kindness, love, and bravery can overcome even the greatest challenges. Snow White's kindness won her the hearts of the dwarfs, and her bravery saved her from the evil queen. In the end, love conquered all, and Snow White found her happily ever after. Her story continues to inspire people to be kind, brave, and to always look for the goodness in others.